Hello and welcome to Driving Innovation. I'll be looking at the Rocky Flats case study and talking about outcome-based contracting best practices. For those of you who don't know, I am Jeanette Nyden. I work with contract professionals who are having difficulty successfully negotiating performance or outcome-based contracts. I can help you and your organization close deals more quickly with better performance and better overall value. And we're going to talk about how that specifically happened at the Rocky Flats nuclear location. This conversation is based on research that's documented in two books that I co-authored, Getting to We, Negotiating Agreements for Highly Collaborative Relationships, and the Vested Outsourcing Manual. Both of these books were co-authored by my colleague Kate Vitasic as part of Vested Outsourcing. So we are going to be talking about outcome-based contracting, and you will see some references to Vested Outsourcing, which is a particular way to approach successfully negotiating an outcome-based agreement. And that's where I am the expert, performance and outcome-based contracting. So let me talk a little bit about the situation. The Rocky Flats produced nuclear materials for nuclear weapons during the Cold War. Some of these are a little bit older, but there was at the time of closure a radioactive quote unquote mess. It was just 15 miles from the metropolis city of Denver. 1,000 pounds of plutonium at one point in time was quote unquote missing. At the time there was a fire before the restoration. It was the worst industrial fire in the United States history. It was deemed by resources, the Department of Energy and others, the most dangerous building in the world, one of the buildings on the site. It was shut down after a joint FBI and EPA raid. So how many times do you hear of the FBI and the Environmental Protection Agency doing that? And it was because of the nuclear hazards. There was a lot of secrecy and suspicion about what was happening. There were protests. One gentleman apparently sat on railroad tracks leading to the site in protest, wanting to know what was happening with all this incredible waste. So you could imagine not only was it a hot site because of the nuclear situation, but it was hot politically, it was hot environmentally, it was hot culturally. There was just a lot of problems and issues with this particular location. No one had ever cleaned up this site as well as the Kaiser-Hill joint venture did. So the goal that the Department of Energy and the Kaiser-Hill joint venture designed were threefold: clean it up and safely dispose of all wastes, including all the hazardous wastes. Close it ahead of schedule and turn it into a wildlife refuge. Now you want to talk about a stretch goal. That's an amazing stretch goal. And they wanted to do it under budget. Kaiser-Hill, as a joint venture, was not the first service provider, integrated service provider, to try to clean up Rocky Flats. So in addition to those noticeable goals, there were previous attempts that were wildly over budget, behind on schedules and milestones, dangerous site conditions for individual workers. So the Government Accounting Office gave Kaiser-Hill, the joint venture, and the Department of Energy in their contractual relationship, a 1% chance of succeeding on their goals. So, not a lot. It'd be like looking at your kid and saying, you got a 1% chance of going to college. Might as well just quit now. The mission, however, was accomplished. Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge was established in 2007, so it did reach that stretch goal. It closed ahead of schedule, so 60 years ahead of the initial baseline. Now that baseline was set with the first integrated service supplier. Kaiser-Hill had a different timeline, and yet Kaiser-Hill closed the site 14 months ahead of project schedule, and the Kaiser-Hill joint venture closed it under budget. 30 billion with a B under budget for the initial projections, and then 500 million under project budget for the very last term of the phasing of the work. The Department of Energy and Kaiser-Hill used an outcome-based contracting model. Vested is an outcome-based contracting model, and that's a very specific and targeted approach with rules and tools and homework and spreadsheet that is discussed in the Vested Outsourcing Manual, where the co-authors and I, Kate Vitasic as the lead, mapped out how to get to an outcome-based contracting model. So as interdependence grows, so does complexity. So you can see the vertical axis is interdependency from minimal to, very interdependent. In an outcome-based model, you really want value to be shared by both parties, the customer and the supplier. And that's because in this particular instance, Kaiser-Hill took huge risks in exchange for that shared value or incentives. And by creating a very different kind of model, you can get to a very significant outcome, right? So here's where we are on the arrow. Kind of looks like a bad tie from the 70s, but nevertheless, here we are. So we are very interdependent, and shared value has a very high important quality to it, but complexity is also there. So let's look at a little bit of what this relationship did to drive innovation, which is the outcome which led to the early closure under budget and ahead of schedule. So outcome thinking was the key, and it was in the contract. So these are, little quotes that we provide to let you know that it was baked into the actual contractual agreement. Seek ways to accelerate cleanup actions and eliminate unnecessary tasks and reviews by requiring that the parties work together. So that's fundamental. What's in it for we? How do we work together rather than this being, the Department of Energy's albatross, or this is all the problem of the service provider and this is why we hired you, right? So we're going to work together to seek ways to accelerate cleanup. And then in the other box, provide the flexibility to modify the work scope and schedules, recognizing that priorities may change due to emerging information on site conditions, risks, and resources. Now, this is a government contract, folks, and it can be done. So you can provide flexibility to modify the work scope and schedules in a competitive solicitation process under the federal acquisition rules. So we have FAR 48, we have other opportunities to create a fixed fee environment where we can still negotiate scope and schedule to allow for phasing and flexibility. And if any of you are involved in agile IT contracting, this is another way in which that flexibility to modify the scope, complete phase 1, create the scope for phase 2 within a competitive solicitation environment within a fixed fee arrangement, it can in fact be done. There were specifically designed metrics. So let's get into the contracting part, right? So we have to specifically design the metrics. We can't use what the sourcing team or the acquisition team or what we used last year. And if someone tells me this is what we did last time in these big performance-based contracts using a sales scorecard, I really am going to break a pencil in half, because what worked, and this is a 2000 contract extension that we're referring to, is certainly not going to work in 2018. So we have to specifically design metrics to meet the situation. That is one of the fundamental keys of good outcome-based contracting. And so there were high-level metrics: completely close and clean it up in less than 6 years for less than $3.94 billion and safely dispose, right? So those were the big objectives designed as a result of conversations in 2000, right? There were standard measures and stretch measures. Now, stretch measures are where you get your innovation, and that's where you get your financial rewards. There was a quote-unquote out-year performance measure established for planning purposes, but it was flexible. So this allowed the DOE, who financed this year by year painstakingly through congressional allocations, to be able to work in a flexible environment, and so that Kaiser-Hill could work within the federal acquisition funding for this. And then there were key quote-unquote operational metrics, which were the environmental standards, the safety standards, the national security standards, right? So we have these really high-level outcomes. We have measures that were, you must meet, this is just standard, OSHA standards. Then there's the stretch measures. Where can we innovate? We allowed for flexibility with the DOE financing. So this was something that took a lot of time, but as a result, it had phenomenal cost savings to the taxpayers. This is what the specifically designed pricing model looks like. Now remember, you guys, this is a federal contract, right? So people think, well, all I can do is fixed fee. That's not entirely true. While there does have to be greater concentration on looking at the federal acquisition rules and following them, you can get cost pass-through savings. You can do a minimum fixed fee. You can do fee at risks with performance targets, penalties for missing performance targets, and cost sharing. If you'll note, it says under fee at risk, Kaiser-Hill kept 30 cents for every $1 under the target budget, and then lost 70 cents for every dollar over budget. So there are ways within a federal regulated system for acquisition that we can do these things. There was a target fee then that was 9% if you met the base and you got all your fee at risk. You got your 9%. Kaiser-Hill got the 9%. Then there were the incentives, and there were stretch incentive fees, meaning you cleaned it up even faster. You know, that little spray that took the plutonium out of the air, while that was a heavy investment for innovation, it paid in dividends because it reached stretch incentives. And then there were financial stretch targets of 11.6% of the maximum fee. And as a result, the Department of Energy, you and I as taxpayers in the United States, saved 13% of the total contract costs by paying Kaiser-Hill approximately 3 times the minimum fee to reduce costs by 20%. So we have this system where the taxpayers and the federal government saved quite a bit of money, which was then shared through very strict contractual models and formulas with Kaiser-Hill. Again, if you want to get deep into this, I talk about this in Getting to We. Kate and I talk about this again in the Vested Outsourcing Manual, and Kate and some other colleagues of ours wrote this up in a case study. Let me know if you want it. So incentives were pivotal, and so there were couple different contracts. So here you see the first contract, what the minimum fee was, and you can see what the second contract was and what the minimum fee was and what the maximum fee. So you can really see how they played with various aspects of the fee structure to get the right mix of cash to Kaiser-Hill in the form of incentive payments to make the capital investments in innovation while simultaneously saving taxpayer dollars both in time and in actual costs out of pocket, while working within the bureaucratic structure of the Department of Energy. The pricing model, there had some other elements, and it really incentivized Kaiser-Hill to take on capital risk, so investing their own cash. So they finance their own investments in technology and solutions. They keep it. You want your suppliers to have enough money that they can capitalize their own innovation and investments if you want to drive innovation. They had financial flexibility and speed as a result of this model. And if the investments and innovations paid off, they could earn approximately 2 times as much the average Department of Energy fee. And as you could see from the previous slides, they did very well. Kaiser-Hill committed to share and did share 20% of its profits with its workers, which was a critical success factor, right? So if I say, hey guys, I'll pay you an extra $1 if you get this done faster, then I actually have to pay you an extra $1 when they get it done faster. And so the whole system was optimized for that financial gain for all parties. The workers, which most of them were unionized, the taxpayer, the Kaiser-Hill management team, Kaiser-Hill shareholders, everybody maximized value. That's why this is an incentive-based, outcome-based contract. The incentives and the outcomes are tied together. The DOE played a pivotal partnership role. Now I put partnership in quotations because Kaiser-Hill was in fact a legal partnership. I'm a lawyer, so I have to put quotations around partnership because it wasn't a legal partnership with Kaiser-Hill. It was a emotional partnership. It was a practical partnership. It was a relational partnership between very large entities. The Department of Energy's role was essential to manage relationships with other government entities and federal agencies to avoid delays, to make regulatory decisions quickly regarding contaminants that were previously unknown, to provide needed support services such as the Department of Energy provided security for the site. And the Department of Energy agreed to bear the cost of any delays caused by it or other federal agency and adjust the budget accordingly. Now that's important because meaning it didn't pay Kaiser-Hill for it, but those delays were on the government's shoulders rather than sitting on the supplier's shoulders. So there was an incentive for the bureaucrats to make sure that it got its ducks in a row and worked with other entities to get its ducks in a row. Sometimes I see with the government too much being placed on the government, too much risk, too much liability. The suppliers kind of have a wash their hands attitude. And then in other circumstances, I've seen the government foist way too much on the suppliers for things that the suppliers can't control. Kaiser-Hill cannot control delays caused by the Department of Energy or any other federal agency or the United States Congress. That doesn't mean Kaiser-Hill gets money for it. It means that the Department of Energy, through its budgeting process, allows for changes that could potentially happen as a result of the federal government's own delays. So here are the results: flexibility and innovation. So Kaiser-Hill invented methods of treating 76 different kinds of hazardous waste that had not been encountered before. Developed a demolitions process to remove concrete from steel reinforcements. That building was designed to withstand aerial bombing attacks. There were safety innovations that resulted in 60 million hours of work with no life-threatening injuries. Now, this was a unionized environment partially, mostly I should say, and it was incredible to hear the interviews of the workers that they really felt such an invested part of the program and the processes and the relationship because of those millions of hours of safe work in a very unsafe environment, meaning it was hazardous waste. Kaiser-Hill developed glycerin-based spray to remove airborne plutonium and other contaminants. So really crazy out there, wild thinking that proved amazing in helping to close and clean up quickly and cost effectively. And finally, designed a robot-operated plasma arc torch to break up large contaminated equipment, keeping people safe while being able to remove those contaminants. So here's a quick slide with the results. If you want to take a deeper dive and look at them, please pause the video. I'm not going to get into each result, but there was a win-win-win. So there were the lowest possible costs with the highest possible profits with a radically improved environment. I'm a backpacking, hiking, kayaking, bike riding person, and the environment's important to me. So this third win for us as taxpayers and United States citizens is a pretty big deal. This is that triple bottom line, that what's in it for we mentality playing itself out. Here's another slide that shows a few highlights and some quotes. Please stop the video if you want to read them. Basically, this is an award-winning outsourcing contract, which is why my colleague Kate Fantastic chose to write about it and invited me twice to help be a part of describing this within Getting to We and the Vested Outsourcing Manual. If you would like to learn more, please contact me by going to my website at www.jnyden.com. Learn about my services, send me an email, check everything out, and I help people successfully negotiate performance and outcome-based contracts. I can help you get to this innovation. Please let me know.